Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
Many people know about these things. The story was interesting to the public, and it was strange that this necklace, which had caused a big fuss in France in the late 1700s, caused another fuss 100 years later. But what I'm going to tell you is only known by the people directly involved and a few others who promised to keep it secret. Since it's likely that someday someone will break that promise, I have no problem revealing the secret and explaining the letter that was in the newspapers 2 days ago. It was an unusual letter that made this mysterious drama even more confusing. 5 days ago, some people were having dinner with Count de Drusubis. There were some ladies there, like his two nieces and his cousin, and some gentlemen. The president of Esseville, Deputy Bocas, Chevalier Floriani, whom the Count knew from Sicily, and General Marquis de Rizières, an old friend from the club. After dinner, the ladies served coffee, and the men were allowed to smoke if they stayed in the living room. They started talking about famous crimes, and that's when Marquis de Rizières, who liked to tease the Count, mentioned the Queen's necklace case, which the Count didn't like at all. Everyone shared their opinions about the case, but they were all different and sometimes impossible. "What about you, sir?" the Countess asked Chevalier Floriani. "What do you think?" "Oh, I, don't really have an opinion, ma'am," the Chevalier replied. Everyone was surprised because the Chevalier had just told some interesting stories about solving mysteries with his father, who was a judge in Palermo. They thought he would have an opinion. "I admit," he said, "I've solved some mysteries even when the smartest detectives couldn't, but I'm not Sherlock Holmes. And I don't know much about the Queen's necklace case." Everyone looked at the Count, who didn't really want to talk about what happened. But he had to explain everything about the theft. The Chevalier listened, thought about it, and then said, "It's very strange. At first, it seems like a simple problem." The Count didn't seem convinced. The others gathered around the Chevalier, who kept talking confidently. "Usually, to find out who did a crime or a theft, we need to know how it happened. In this case, it's simple. The thief could only come in through the door or the window. But you can't open a locked door from outside, so the thief must have come in through the window." "But the window was closed and locked when we checked," the Count said. Ignoring the interruption, the Chevalier continued. "To get in, the thief just needed to make a bridge from the kitchen balcony to the window ledge. And since there's a small window above the main one." "But the window was locked too," the Count interrupted again. The Chevalier calmly replied, "Yes, but there's usually a small window above the main one in old houses like this. Without it, the theft doesn't make sense." "Yes, there is one, but it was closed too. So we didn't think about it," the Count said. "That was a mistake. If you checked, you'd see it was opened," the Chevalier explained. "But how?" the Count asked. "I think there's a ring on a wire to open it," the Chevalier said. "So someone could use a tool like a poker to open it from outside." The Count laughed. "That's clever, but there's no hole in the window." "There was a hole," the Chevalier insisted. "Nonsense, we would have seen it," the Count argued. "You have to look for it. It's probably in the putty by the window," the Chevalier explained. The Count got up, very excited. He walked back and forth in the room a few times, then came to Floriani and said, "No one has been in that room since. Nothing's changed." "Okay, sir, you can check if what I said is true." "But it doesn't match what the judge found. You didn't see anything, yet you're saying something different from what we know." Floriani didn't seem bothered by the Count's annoyance. He just smiled and said, "Well, sir, I'm just sharing my idea. If I'm wrong, you can prove it easily." I'll do that now. Your confidence is surprising." The Count muttered a bit more, then rushed out of the room. Nobody said anything while he was gone, which made the situation feel serious. Finally, the Count came back, looking pale and nervous. He spoke to his friends in a shaky voice. "I'm sorry. The Chevalier's revelations were unexpected. I never thought." His wife asked eagerly, "What is it?" He stuttered, "The hole is there, by the window." He grabbed the Chevalier's arm and said firmly, "Now, sir, keep going. I admit you were right so far, but now, what else happened?" Floriani gently freed his arm and said after a moment, "Well, this is what I think. The thief knew the Countess was going to wear the necklace that night. So, when you were away, he set up his bridge to get in. He saw you hide the necklace through the window and then broke the glass to open it. But the window was too high for him to reach the lock through the small window above. Then he must have crawled through it. No way, it's too small for a person to fit through." "Then it wasn't a person," Floriani said. "What?" "If a person couldn't fit through the small window, it must have been a child." "A child? Didn't you mention that your friend Henriette has a son?" "Yes, a son named Raoul." "Then it's likely Raoul stole the necklace." "What proof do you have?" "Plenty. For example." He paused, then continued, "For example, that bridge. It's unlikely the child brought it from outside and back without anyone noticing. He probably used something nearby. In Henriette's kitchen, were there shelves against the wall for her pans and dishes?" "Yes, 2 shelves, I think." "Are you sure they're securely attached to the brackets? If not, the child could have taken them down and made the bridge. And maybe the bent poker used to open the window was from the stove." The Count left the room without saying anything this time. The others weren't as anxious as before. They believed Floriani was right. When the Count returned, he said, "It was the child. Everything points to it." "Did you see the shelves and poker?" "Yes. The shelves were removed, and the poker is still there." "But the Countess said it must have been his mother. Henriette is guilty. She must have made her son." "No," Floriani interrupted, "the mother wasn't involved." "Nonsense. They shared the same room. The child couldn't have done it without her knowing." "Yes, they lived together, but it happened in the next room while the mother was asleep." "And the necklace?" the Count asked. "It would have been found with the child's things." "No, he had been at school. When you found him reading that morning, he had just come from school. Instead of focusing on the innocent mother, the police should have searched the child's desk." "But what about the money Henriette got each year? Doesn't that prove her involvement?" "If she was involved, would she have accepted the money? And she was closely watched. But the child could have easily gone to a nearby city, sold 1 or 2 diamonds, and asked for the money to be sent from Paris. He could do this every year." A strange feeling weighed on the Drusubis and their guests. There was something about Floriani's tone and manner that bothered the Count. There was a hint of sarcasm that felt unfriendly. But the Count pretended to laugh it off, saying, "Your ideas are very creative and interesting. I admire your imagination." "No, I'm not imagining. I'm just describing what likely happened." "But how do you know all this?" "From what you told me. I imagine the life of the mother and child in the countryside, her sickness, his efforts to sell the jewels to save her. She dies, and years later, he returns home to face accusations against his mother." His words hung in the silence. The Count and Countess tried to understand, but they were scared of what they might realize. Finally, the Count asked, "Who are you, sir?" "I'm Chevalier Floriani, whom you met in Palermo and invited to your house." "What does all this mean?" "It's just a story. I'm imagining how Henriette's son might feel if he confessed to the theft to ease his mother's pain." He spoke with emotion, leaning towards the Countess. It was clear he was Henriette's son. He wanted them to recognize him. The Count didn't know how to react. Should he call for help? Expose the man who had once robbed him? But that was long ago. And who would believe this strange story about the guilty child? It was better to play along and pretend not to understand. "Your story is interesting. But what happened to this young man, this model's son?" "I'm sure he's doing fine." To steal the Queen's necklace at 6 years old. What a feat. And he did it effortlessly. He just had to reach out his hand. "Both hands," Floriani added, laughing. His companions were shocked. What secrets did Floriani hide? His life must have been extraordinary, starting as a thief at 6 and now bravely confronting his victim with all the grace of a polite guest. He stood up to say goodbye to the Countess, who instinctively moved away. He smiled, saying, "You're afraid of me? Maybe I took my role as a storyteller too seriously." She stayed calm and replied politely, "No, sir. The story of that loyal son fascinated me, and I'm glad to hear that my necklace had such an interesting history. But don't you think that Henriette's son was influenced by his family history in choosing his path?" He shuddered, understanding her point, and said, "I'm sure. His tendency towards crime must have been strong, or he would have given up." "Why?" "Because most of the diamonds were fake. Only a few were real, bought from an English jeweler. The others were sold to survive." "It was still the Queen's necklace," the Countess said proudly. Something he, Henriette's son, couldn't understand. He knew that, real or fake, the necklace was just a symbol of pride and vanity. The Count made a threatening gesture, but his wife stopped him. "Monsieur," she said, "if this man has any honor." She paused, intimidated by Floriani's calm demeanor. "If he has any honor," he repeated. She realized she wouldn't get anywhere speaking to him like this. Despite her anger and hurt pride, she said almost politely, "Monsieur, legend says that Rideau de Valette, when he had the Queen's necklace, didn't damage the setting. He understood that the diamonds were just decorations, and he respected the craftsmanship. Do you think this man did the same?" "I believe the setting still exists." The child respected it. "Well, if you see him, tell him he's holding on to something that belongs to the Drusubis family, even without the diamonds. The Queen's necklace is ours by right." "I'll tell him, madam." He bowed, said goodbye to the Count and guests, and left. 4 days later, the Countess found the Queen's necklace on her bedside table in a red case with the Cardinal's emblem. The next day, the Echo de France published a sensational article. Arsène Lupin recovers the stolen Queen's necklace and returns it to the Drusubis family. A commendable and chivalrous act.